Okay, I bring you greetings from the mighty 8th Air Force Museum in Pooler, Georgia, where I am the director of the museum's Roger A. Freeman 8th Air Force Research Center that was dedicated in October 2006. And I thank you for this opportunity to tell about your museum and research center, which has become the premier location for 8th Air Force aviation research and preservation of materials related to World War II, and we're working on extending that into the jet age. Today I'm going to focus on the research possibilities concerning POWs. And that's the first one, and then this is what I wanted, maybe. Okay, I think I have to make sure I have this, the mic up and this up, and then we're good. This is a slide of the facade of the museum, and the main collections database that we're inputting information into now has over 50,000 entries, and of these, almost 2,000 are specifically related to the POWs. This research center emphasizes the personal stories of the men who were POWs. Please realize that we don't have government documents unless the individuals have given us their copies. But what we do have are the personal stories, the personal information. So in pursuing the personal stories of individual POWs, the researcher will be able to consult original manuscript diaries, original letters, original artwork, and additional three-dimensional objects created by POWs during their captivity. There also are some original newspapers published by POWs, as well as a series of photographs detailing life in Stalag Luft I. With another recently received collection of photographs, the November 1945 letter from Richard F. McDonald selling them is included as part of this collection. There are also a steadily increasing number of oral history interviews with former POWs, and some of you are here today whose interview resides at the Research Center. And there are also those written personal accounts composed by former POWs following their liberation to let others know of their experiences. Keeping this overview in mind, I now want to share with you some of the specific treasures of the Research Center. And so the series of slides that you're going to see are all out of the Research Center. No other source was used. So the first is a photograph of Byron Morrell, who was a fighter pilot in the 56th Fighter Group. On November 26, 1943, the 56th Fighter Group escorted B-17 Flying Fortresses on their way back from a mission to Bremen and destroyed 23 Nazi fighters and attained a new 8th Air Force record for one mission. Morrell flew on this mission in his P-47. You see him climbing into the cockpit. And during the aerial combat, unfortunately, his fuel tank was damaged and leaking fuel. And the leak became so severe that he had to bail out over Holland and then was captured by the Germans. He remained a prisoner of war in Stalag Luft I until liberation by the Americans in July of 1945. At Stalag Luft I, the YMCA provided watercolors for the men who, like Morrell, had artistic talent, wanted to paint, and in 1944, Morrell completed this signed and dated original watercolor of 8 P-47s preparing to take off on a mission. Another remarkable artifact made by POW is this. And the individual who did it is Fred Reichel, who was a co-pilot in the 303rd Bomb Group and was shot down by, his B-17 was shot down by German fighters on January 11th, 1944. And this that you're looking at is this triangular shaped red, white, and blue fabric that has placed on it 6 made by Mr. Reichel military insignia that he melted metal. He made sand molds and melted the metal to create the insignia. So from the top, moving around to the left, you see the U.S. pilot wings. In the second row, it's from the Russians, and then a Czechoslovakian one. And then then comes France, the British RAF, and at the bottom, Polish wings. Here it is. And then the next thing that I want to show you was created by Sam Miller, and you see him seated in the middle, and on this photograph his name got highlighted. On January 16th, 1944, the 398th Bomb Group was attacking the aircraft engine factory at Munich and lost 2 B-17s. One of them was the one that Sam Miller was on, and he bailed out, but he hit the ground so hard that he fractured several vertebrae and both ankles. So there he was lying in the Alps in Austria, hoping someone would find him. And it took 2 days, but members of the Hitler Youth found him, and then they went to find German authorities. And so he became a POW and spent the rest of the war in a German hospital. In the German hospital, recovering from his injuries, he collected patches from other wounded prisoners of war and stitched them together to form this blanket. And then the next person that I want to focus on became the commander of the 357th Fighter Group on February 17th, 1944. His name, Colonel Henry Russell Spicer. And there you see him seated on the wing of his P-51 with two of the ground crewmen who crewed his fighter plane. He flew a P-51 for the first time a couple days after he became group commander, and then led every group mission after that until he was shot down by flak on March 5th, 1944. He bailed out into the English Channel and then drifts for 2 days in a one-man dinghy. Now this is March, it's cold. So Air Sea Rescue try to find him, but they don't. He finally drifted ashore on the coast of France, where German soldiers found him lying on the beach, suffering from both exposure and frostbitten hands and feet. The Nazis took him for interrogation and medical treatment and then sent him to Stalag Luft 1. He arrived in March of '44. He became the commanding officer of North 2 Compound, and he inspired his fellow POWs by challenging the German guards at every opportunity. According to one other American POW in his compound, this put a stronger backbone in every POW. After about 6 months, on November 1st, 1944, Spicer addressed his men, telling them that the Germans have shown us they are not to be trusted, that they are liars, cheats, and thieves. He then mentioned atrocities he knew of, including an incident at Arnhem of Germans shooting all the British wounded in a captured British hospital. Spicer continued, "Personally, I would be glad to rot in this hole for the next 10 years, provided that in the meantime the German army was being wiped off the face of the earth." The Nazis then try him and convict him, and his sentence is 6 months of solitary confinement at Stalag Luft 1, followed by execution from a Nazi firing squad. Fortunately, Soviet troops liberate the camp before this is carried out, and Spicer was released from solitary confinement on the 1st of May 1945. Now, before the solitary confinement, he'd gotten a stitchery kit. Let's see if I can make this work. And he, from the American Red Cross, and used these materials to complete what you're seeing here. It's an embroidered picture of an English garden. And if anybody in this audience likes to do embroidery, it has a wide variety of stitches, including the back stitch, the split and stem stitches, the chain and satin stitches, and many, many French knots. There was a POW art show at Stalag Luft 1, and Colonel Spicer was awarded first place for needlecraft. And there's his ribbon. In 1964, then by this time, Major General Henry Russell Spicer retired from the U.S. Air Force and then died 4 years later. Now, I want to show you another special thing. At the end of the war, in April 1945, the largest mass rescue of prisoners, over 110,000 soldiers from all Allied countries, took place. The location was Stalag 7A in Moosburg, Germany. These prisoners had been gathered there by the Germans from other camps to use as bargaining chips with the Allies at war's end. And so I'm showing you a photograph of one of these prisoners. He's Frank Murphy. He was a B-17 navigator in the 100th Bomb Group and was shot down during Black Week on the mission to Munster that occurred on October 10th, 1943. And so I'm going to quote to you very briefly from his book because I think it expresses is one of the best expressions of the mood of the POWs as they watch what happens just before the Americans liberate them. There was an unmistakable air of expectancy among the Kriegies at Stalag 7A on the morning of April 29th. Clearly something big was about to happen. The first shots rang out about 9 a.m. Roughly an hour after it began, the shooting abruptly stopped. The silence that followed was an almost deathly quiet, too quiet, strange and unnatural. It was short-lived. We heard the unmistakable rumble and clanking of heavy armor approaching the camp from somewhere outside our perimeter fences. Moments later, without fanfare or warning, 3 Sherman tanks of the 47th Tank Battalion, United States Third Army, came crashing through the front fence near the front gate. Amid the shouting, screaming, and cheering of the newly freed prisoners, the tanks drove down the main street of Stalag 7A and halted. Kriegies immediately swarmed all over them. Feelings not expressed for months and years were finally being freely released. Frantically trying to defend himself from the mob, the besieged sergeant, driver of one tank, declared that he had never seen such a crazy bunch of ragged-ass people. The true end of our captivity came about 12:30 p.m. when the American flag, Old Glory, was seen being hoisted to the top of a church steeple. Now that's what Frank thought he saw. Actually, he saw the steeple over City Hall in the nearby town of Moosburg. The Nazi flag had been taken from its place above the town hall. As one of the 8,000 American Kriegies faced the town hall, came to attention and saluted. all of us with tears of pride in our country and pent-up emotion trickling down our cheeks. This Nazi flag, which I'm going to show you right now, a photograph of it, is part of the collections at the Mighty 8th Air Force Museum. It was autographed by just over 100 newly liberated Americans. Their inscriptions begin with, "Nazi flag torn down from top of City Hall in Moosburg, Germany. American flag replaced this one at 12:45 p.m. or near there, April 29th, 1945, our Liberation Day. Hallelujah." And it's up at the top, and here's a detail of it. It was written by A.S. Lowe Major, who is later General Andrew Lowe. And there's another signature that I want to show you. And it just, no, here it is. This is some more of the signatures, and then at the lower part of the white, here's a detail of it. You see the name of an individual who I think is the person who brought it over to the newly liberated Americans, because you'll see his name, and then he says, not a PW, but an American liberator. Now I'm pleased to tell you about that there are exhibit plans to include additional artifacts in the Prisoner of War exhibit at the Mighty 8th Air Force Museum. And I think you'll agree with me, the ones that aren't on display already, which except for Sam's blanket is what I've shown you, that we have some exceptional things to put on display. The plans for this exhibit are being finalized, and my thoughts on this are to display things that you've seen today as well as additional artifacts. I want to thank both families and veterans of the Mighty 8th for entrusting your valued papers, photographs, and artifacts from your wartime service to be permanently preserved at the Mighty 8th Air Force Museum. This museum is committed to preserving our cultural heritage and to fulfilling its mission to preserve for all Americans the stories of courage, character, and patriotism embodied by the men and women of the 8th Air Force from World War II to the present. The museum staff, of which I am part, feel privileged to be part of preserving your treasures while promoting the legacy of the 8th Air Force and teaching younger generations of Americans the values embodied by these 8th Air Force airmen who served in World War II. The Research Center is open Monday through Friday from 9 to 12 and 1 to 4, and I invite you to come to find out more about the 8th Air Force during World War II and the individuals served, particularly about the POWs. And so I thank you very much for allowing me to share this with you today.